Produced by a German manufacturer, Fawn, the L912 or 908 entered service in 1958 to 1970 for the German Armed Forces as a 6x6 prime mover. In the game of SnowRunner, however, the Plad 440 Buddy also can be called upon for similar operations, and I believe it does them quite well. Season 16 has given us 3 vehicles, and spoiler alert, this one was the one I was looking most forward to in this review. So with that being said, let's jump right into it, downsides first. I'm simply just going to give you the hard truth on this matter, and even though this is the biggest downside, I actually favor this, and I'll elaborate here in a moment. The Plad essentially reminds me of something like a Freightliner 114 SD when it comes to pulling power, but I feel it has a little bit more pulling potential than the 114 SD. With heavy pulls, you will notice it will be fighting, and it's not going to have the brute strength that some trucks have had as of recent. So to get to my point I was first making here on downside number 1, why do I favor or why do I like this? Well, I don't believe that every truck should be elite in terms of pulling potential or other aspects of off-roading, of which we have plenty of at the moment. We've had an onslaught of those added recently. It's like the next best thing comes with every DLC. I don't believe that's how DLC should work, in my humble opinion. So here, good on Sabre for actually making a truck that's still very impressive, and you guys will find that out here later in the review, without throwing the next best engine at it. At downside number 2 here, with a 40% critical damage threshold, and all that it suffers after the point that it actually becomes damaged, makes this downside a legitimate cause for concern. It does have a roof rack to fix a mistake or two, so don't worry about that. But per this numerical torque value that we just found out here, you don't really want to incur these penalties. Maxing out here at 3 inches below 50 solidifies this downside's place pretty much. But I'd also like to add that it doesn't have a heavyweight double option, which have been appearing as of late, and I'm okay with it. So with that being said, we will talk on tires a little later. At downside number 4, with a small fuel tank the same size as the Paystar 5070, again, another downside we could not overlook, especially knowing how much cross-map travel time you will be doing in Season 16, because it is quite a bit. But the good news is, stick around for when we talk about the pros, and I'll explain why this is not as alarming as you might think. With a custom sideboard bed, most crane, bed, hitch trailer enjoyers will be saddened to hear they cannot support this setup. And this is the perfect time for me to insert my plug to influence my fellow gamers to make the switch to a better setup, which is a semi-trailer. I made the switch a couple years ago and couldn't be happier with a better performance, and to be quite frank, Sabre has been adding more semis as of late than hitch trailers, so this could be a hint from the developer as well. Alright y'all, we've had a few things that folks definitely are probably not pleased with when we look at the Plad here, but I actually believe that this could be one of the better vehicles in its class, and we'll talk about why. Let's get to the good news. At number 1, leaving out the normal power part, I'll speak on this on my next point actually, but it has a switchable all-wheel drive and diff lock, allowing players to control when they need to apply benefits for given situations, such as fuel savings or just better performance. While only having 165k torque, its pulling power has actually impressed me, if I'm being honest here. Many folks have seen my extreme test hill failures on stream or maybe on videos, and they immediately write a truck off. But in fact, some very elite trucks fail a lot on those extreme trials. Using the 114 SD as kind of a comparison here, even though the Plad is much better as we'll talk about here later with these other upsides, I do enjoy the 114 SD, and I've hauled some pretty heavy weight in some pretty hard regions in SnowRunner, like Season 15, which is Quebec. The Buddy, however, definitely has more grit than the 114 SD, and also it can pull more weight, I feel, as well. This ground clearance, despite having less than 50-inch tires, is quite a thing to look at. This might be as good as you can get. After looking at these images, there isn't really much for me to say, and you've probably heard me rant about this a little bit too much, but I will add that underneath this magical flying carpet, I mean truck frame, There is a potential set of custom tires that look good and are comparable to the tires of similar type and weight. As far as weight is concerned, it is pretty close or as heavy as some notable off-roaders in its class, and its stability has been shown to be very nice with low centers of gravity. Low CGs are great, but the Plad is also complemented in this area with our next upside. Two trucks that I believe are very stable, the Paystar 5600 TS and the Kenworth C500. But the Paystar's suspension aids in its balance due to flexation and travel. If you ever watch it go over rocks, it is a thing to marvel at. On the other hand, the C500 has a bilaterally tied together rear suspension that I believe harms its balance without a saddle attached. The Plad suspension, however, travels nicely and absorbs force from undulating terrain quite well, and I believe this helps even further with stability. Also, before moving on, I must add that the Plad can turn really sharp, which is great for catching yourself when you're going off balance or just maneuvering in and out of sharp, windy trails. The reason why the fuel tank size mentioned earlier in the downsides isn't really much of an issue is due to its final engine being extremely efficient. It actually has the same burn value base as the Step 310 Echo's Voyne engine. Even with load, it stays at burn values that are very minor, and coupled with the roof rack and its ability to toggle off all-wheel drive at will, the Buddy's going to have pretty good range, and it's much needed, especially in Washington. With decent pulling power, stability, maneuverability, and great ground clearance, Sabre has put together another truck that doesn't have standout power, but still is going to go down as one of the better trucks in its class. The only thing it really lacks, in my humble opinion, is its pulling power, which I like that it doesn't have a ton of. The other is potentially a little bit more fuel and perhaps some tires. So in conclusion, the Plad has been one of my favorite additions for the Year 4 Finale DLC. It's not a standout in places like power and tire options, but it feels like an OG vanilla truck similar to something of like a Paystar 5070, Step 310 Echo, Freightliner 114 SD, and even perhaps the White Western Star. All those options aren't blowing anyone away with engine torque numbers, but they still are very fun to play with and can be very viable. Aside from the Plad's collision mesh being very far from OG 2020 vehicles of those I've just mentioned, it gives me the feels of old. Despite not having a huge engine and OP tire options, it performs very well, and I actually believe it sits pretty high on the tier list. In truth, its frame saddle position could be probably better, and we've had options that have been recent that have had really good saddle positions, but the thing is I haven't really had many issues, and I've also saddled up trucks that have had much worse circumstances. A lot of you know I'm pretty passionate about SnowRunner because I've been making videos for 4 years, and I think with some of that passion comes a lot of critique, which I admit might be a little bit too much at times. But with this seasonal truck DLC, once again I applaud Sabre for holding back the onslaught of crazed OP truck additions, which in turn make the OG 2020 vehicles feel less desirable. Don't get me wrong here, the Plad is very formidable, but it's not on the levels of some recent additions. So in closing, the Plad 440 Buddy feels to be a better version of some OG 2020 vehicles due to its infamous crazy ground clearance, and a few other things as well. I love that it's efficient, it's stable, and will feel the struggles of the game with heavy loads and have success by good driving techniques. That's where you become immersed in the gritty experience of SnowRunner, and you feel the relief and satisfaction when you succeed. I hope y'all have enjoyed the review and potentially learned a few things along the way as well. So until next time, y'all, God bless and stay upright.